While starting to assemble the rear suspension on the Transtar 4300, some interesting inconsistencies showed up. Here, the cross members are located where they're supposed to be, per the molded-in guides, but on the other side of the frame, none of the molded-in bolt head detail lines up. Both sets of bolt head detail appear to be off by about 4 scale inches, and the bolt pattern on the rear cross member doesn't look correct either. I wondered if this was because this kit was originally tooled as the Transtar 4270 and then retooled as the 4300 later. So I got out an old kit from the collection and compared the frame rails. The length of frame rails overall is the same for both kits, and there's no bolt head detail at all molded on the outside of the 4270 frame rail. Cross member location, as shown by the molded-in ribs to guide their placement, is the same on both kits, with the only major difference between the frame rails being the locating holes for different suspension components. Same thing with the other frame rail. No molded-in bolt head detail provided on the 4270, and the locating holes are for the air suspension that kit originally came with. The most significant difference between frame rails on the 4270 and 4300 kits is the cab support crossmember being noticeably further forward on the 4270 because of the shorter hood on that version of the truck. The shorter hood of the 4270 is really visible here, with parts from both kits compared side by side. Although it didn't solve the mystery of why the bolt head detail was in the wrong location, it was fun to compare the new and old kits. On with the assembly and repair. The main cross member above the suspension can stay where it is, and it's easy to remove the two locating ribs and move the forward cross member ahead about 4 scale inches. One other item to note is the holes drilled in the ends of the walking beams. These fit matching holes drilled in the axle attachment points, so the brass wire pins can be added for greater strength. The bolt head circled in blue here will simply be removed and new ones installed once the frame is assembled. On the inside of the frame rails, a contoured area that was molded in for positive crossmember location has to be sanded smooth. I find sanding sticks made from 250 by 250 styrene strip, cut on a 45, and with a piece of coarse sandpaper glued to the end, work well for this application. To make up for the thickness of material that was removed from the inside of the frame rails, pieces cut from 10th styrene sheet were glued to each end of the crossmember as shown here. They're cut slightly over size and will be trimmed down before the crossmember is installed. You can also see here how I've drilled the crossmember out so that air lines and wiring can be added later. This photo is from an online auction site and is of a Transtar 4300 with Hendrickson suspension, providing a general idea of what the bolt layout should look like. Based on this, I marked the location of the bottom 2 bolts using the vernier caliper as a layout tool. The upper row of bolts will be left off until the 5th wheel is installed permanently. I'll be using 30 thou styrene rod to represent the replacement bolt heads, and I made this simple tool from a piece of parts runner and 2 sections of styrene strip to set the bolt heads at a consistent distance, matching existing bolt head detail. The strips are 0.15 by 40 thou wide, and I came up with this thickness by measuring the existing bolt heads on the frame with the vernier caliper. Drill holes as required for the replacement bolts, insert a short piece of 30 thou styrene rod, and use the tool to push it into place, and then apply a small drop of solvent cement to lock it in. The bolt on the left has been installed, and the one on the right is being pushed into place. Holes drilled in the ends of the suspension walking beams for brass wire pins were mentioned earlier. Here are the matching holes drilled in the axle attachment points. The pins are cut from 0.32 diameter brass wire and are slightly shorter than the distance from outside face to outside face of the axle attachment brackets. This way, styrene discs can be glued in place after, trapping the pins in place and covering up the holes. The kit cross shaft was also replaced with brass tube because this was easier than cleaning up the parting lines on the kit part and keeping the piece perfectly round. Here you can see the styrene discs glued in place, trapping the pins and providing a clean finished appearance. These were punched from 10 thou black styrene. You can also see the drive shaft between the two axles, which is a combination of kit parts and brass tube. Because the drive axle spacing was extended to 60 inches, the kit drive shaft is too short to be used in its stock configuration, but it provides good U-joints, which can be further improved by drilling them out and removing excess material as shown here to open up the yokes. Add short pieces of 1/16 brass rod to each yoke, and use 332 and 1/8 brass tube to make the telescoping portions of the drive shaft. Small discs punched from 10 thou styrene can be further used to detail the yokes as shown here. Using telescoping brass tube also makes it much easier to install the U-joint once the axles are in place. The 60-inch drive axle spacing also affects another suspension component, the track rods, which are both too short now. These can easily be replaced by using styrene tube and brass rod. For one end of the track rod I used a combination of 3/16 and 332 styrene tube. For the other end I used a piece of 1/8 tube, and the track rod itself is a section of 3/64 brass rod. The stock kit track rod is shown above for comparison. Here are the two track rods assembled. The excess length projecting beyond the 1/8 tube will be installed inside the crossmember for extra strength. Here are the torque rods installed, and as a final detail, bolt head castings were glued in place on either side of the bracket to represent the bolt that actually holds the torque rod in place between the axle and the frame. And that's where we'll end this first upload for 2023. Thanks for watching as the rear suspension came together, and in the near future I'm going to do an update on the American LaFrance ladder chief, and also a separate piece on the fifth wheel and mounting plate assembly shown here, sitting in place temporarily.